Hi, everyone. Welcome to Two Bald Guys Talking Safety. I'm Langdon DeMett,
And I'm Julian Taylor.
and welcome to our podcast.
Hello, and welcome to Two Bald Guys Talking Safety. And we've got a bit of a bonus for you today because we've got three bald guys, not necessarily just talking safety, but we're going to be talking about various other things that relate very strongly to safety. So I'm joined, first of all, today by my usual compadre, the shiny-headed one from Nashville, Tennessee.
Hello.
And also joined by Graham Goulden. So, Graham, welcome to the podcast.
Good to be here, guys. Good. It's just nice to be here and meet you both.
Give us a bit of background. So, who on earth is Graham Goulden, and why do you think we've invited you to come on the podcast as a guest?
I'm asked these questions a lot, and I often think to myself, why am I here? Well, let's go back to where it all began. I was a police officer for 30 years in Scotland. So I live south of in Scotland, south of Edinburgh, our sort of capital city. So, and for 30 years, I was a police officer. In the last 9 years of my policing career, I was a sort of a chief inspector looking at violence prevention in Scotland. And it was in those last years of my career that I became really curious about not only how we prevent violence and harm for the long term, but also the presence of people who see things. You know, we know from so much research that bystanders, friends, colleagues, strangers, classmates, teammates, we see things. We see the build up to situations. We see the event itself, and we're also told about something afterwards. And, you know, back in those days, it got me really thinking about the power to train people to see things, but importantly, move from that passive role to that active role, to do something before it got to that point of crisis. And so we started to, introduce these types of concepts into our way of thinking, and really part of that really contributed to some success in Scotland. And it's still that success story today, where we've reduced lots of harm in Scotland. Still got issues, but things are in the downward trend. And I left policing sort of 8 years ago this summer, and thought to myself, one, far too young to retire. Hopefully I look young enough to still have some life ahead of me. And so I've taken this sort of bystander concept into different settings, and not just to deal with things like poor behavior, to deal with things like mistakes, health and safety issues, mistakes in workplaces and process. My old profession, think of situations where mistakes happen and that leads to harm against the officer, the organization, or the public. So I find myself working in public authorities, tackling things like poor behaviours, but also poor well-being, because colleagues and friends witness people struggling with their well-being. I work with law firms in Scotland and the UK, again similar, and I'm working with policing in the US. I train police officers in the United States, not to intervene on the public, but to intervene on each other. Langdon, you're aware of cases like George Floyd, other cases where if somebody had done something at the time, then who's George Floyd? Because he'd still be alive today. And here in the UK, UK policing has been in the media a lot. And this is I think the 4th anniversary of the murder of Sarah Everard, who was murdered by a serving Metropolitan Police officer. And since then, it's really become clear that the silence of colleagues, friends, has really been a big issue, around, again, not just poor behaviours, but around things like, mistakes. The classic one, the horrible one in the Met, was the police sergeant who was shot in the police cell a few years ago. And the mistake was in the stop and search. And we know from policing as well that well-being is a big issue, a major issue in policing, poor well-being. And let's face it, healthier people make fewer mistakes. So policing needs to start to think about how it creates that sort of sense of community, because that sense of community can help buffer the stresses that officers and staff are under. And I'm working with fire and rescue as well, similar, because they've been in similar. So our chat today, I'll probably get quite excited because there's so much potential in activating people to do stuff. So yeah, that's a short summary of me.
It's really interesting, Graham. And actually, where did this come from? It actually came from a member of my family who attended one of your courses and, and came back really giddy and excited by it. And he said, Jules, you need to go and listen to this guy because he's got some really good stuff to say. So that's where it came from. And it was was interesting because as soon as I started looking at your website, it just has so much linkage into sort of safety in terms of that people seeing stuff and reacting to it, which just is one of the key challenges at the moment, is that it doesn't happen. And I thought one of the really, really interesting things you just said there, and one of the interesting things I read on your website, was about observing wellness. I didn't know whether you wanted to talk a bit more about that, because I think that was a really interesting one in the workplace, and colleagues observing a lack of wellness.
Yeah, policing, like lots of big organizations, fire and rescue, policing, other high risk settings, some stress is good for you. Let's agree, if the stress is predictable, not extreme, and is not prolonged, then it builds resilience. It's good for it. It's good for us. But see, when the stress is unpredictable, extreme, and prolonged, that ain't good for us, right? That isn't good for us. And I think it's something we need to really start to better understand. And policing, I've noticed in policing and fire and rescue, we focus a lot. I think it's called like suicide prevention training. So we train officers because suicide's a big issue in policing and fire and rescue. And there's been so many stories in the last few years where, we've heard about senior officers, junior officers, and all these professions, either during a career or at the end of the career, dying by suicide. It's horrific. And my issue with that is, that's great. It's so important we have this training, but why are we waiting for our colleagues to get to that level of poor wellness, poor well-being before we train people to intervene? Surely we need to be helping people to notice the little things, the changes, the subtle changes early on. And even before that, even before we notice these things, how do we build a community of support? How do we, the buffer against that type of stress, prolonged, extreme, unpredictable, isn't the fancy well-being program or the new sofa in the mess room or the coffee machine. It's the community we create. And that's the check-ins. It's the, hey, how you doing, Jules? It's the coffee. It's the chat around a cup of coffee. It's the somebody saying that was a great job you did yesterday. And if we can, for me, that's the bit where we can help one notice the early signs, but also we can start to create that community. So for me, that's what I'm really passionate about bringing out in these professions. Is it's not the big things we need, it's the little things. It's the things that we actually want to do already, I think, in our lives.
I think that's a really good point, because oftentimes in health and safety, and it definitely affects where you are as well, or can vary depending on where you are. But in the States, you still see a lot of times the workforce that maybe is a little more aged or is a little more, we'll say, private, quote unquote, where you don't worry about me, that's my business. And I think they miss. So then you're trying to make, and that, a lot of it falls on the EHS professional, which is, I'm not going to say it's unfair, but it's slightly unfair and challenging, because we're supposed to be able to recognize that. And when you think about total worker health, you have to recognize that to try to help each other, but then also have the confidence to say something. And that's very challenging, because it's hard to even raise your hand to say that that's a lot of times a risky workplace or a risky task, or, whatever it is. So I think that's to me, it makes sense. It's just slightly not only looking out for yourself, but looking out for those around you and having the openness to say, hey, you good? I mean, sometimes it could be as simple as that. And I don't know that we do that.
There's a tool that I use with policing in the US, and the aviation industry used similar tools in the past. And it's like an escalation approach to intervening. A big, and you're spot on there, Langdon, is sometimes people just don't know what to say. It's like me interfering in your life is not my business. And for me, when does something become your business? Do we wait for the big stuff to happen then, or do we, if I'm your friend, and that's you are my business, that sense of loyalty that we have for our friends. And I think aviation, and policing, we use a model called PACT. That's PACT: probe, alert, challenge, take action. So it's about training people to have these early conversations. Hey, you okay? I've seen some little changes in your behavior, or you're just not yourself. Hey, are you okay? It's a probing question. And that will lead to me being satisfied that you're okay. It's just a one-off. Everything's good. Or you might open up to me, and then we know what's going on. Or you might just ignore me, but it continues. So the next step for me is to alert. It's the alert stage. Hey, Langdon, are you okay? I've seen this. I've seen that. I'm concerned about you. And and the next stage is challenge. So that's when I'm really concerned about you, Langdon. I've seen this. Nothing's changing. And then T is take action. Jules, we need to do something about this. This is not getting any better. I need to go and do something about it. So, it's all the managers and leaders saying this is important, but we need to equip people with the basic skills and the basic tools to be able to have these little conversations.
I think it's interesting that what you say there. I think two things, that we've got to equip people with the skills, because I'm a blunt Yorkshireman. I ain't good at having those conversations. But I think the other thing that really sort of resonated just listening to you and Langdon talking there was the community piece, which is actually you can't rely on the safety team, because the safety team aren't there all the time. So you can't rely on the manager, because the manager isn't there all the time. So it's actually about creating that culture, that community, isn't it?
Yeah. And yeah, we often see, there's no doubt leaders set a tone. Leaders, they set the culture, they set the mood music for the organization. But here's the thing, for me, we all benefit from that. So surely we all have a role, and we talk about leadership as, skills acquired. For me, leadership is stuff that can be activated in the moment. This is what we're talking about today is leadership, and it's leading in the moment. It's that ability to be able to show compassion and empathy at that time. It's that ability to, this is hard, but I need to do it, and show that moral courage to do the right thing at the time. So for me, it's about just helping people to see help them tap into moral compass. Moral compass is the big motivator here. Your sense of responsibility to your friends. So for example, in policing and fire, we talk about loyalty as a strength. Teamwork and loyalty as a strength in these professions. It's also a weakness. Loyalty can be a weakness. Blind loyalty, turning a blind eye to behaviors, not having these difficult conversations. So we need to, in my work, I try and redefine loyalty. What does it mean to be a good friend? In the US, what was the campaign in the 1980s around drink driving? Friends don't let friends drive drunk. And it was one of the most successful ad campaigns ever. And it led to, I think, around 70% of citizens in the US taking the car key off their friend. And what was the success? Friends. And everybody listening to this, what do friends do for each other? When a friend needs help, what do? You help them. It doesn't matter the time of day, how old they are, their sexuality, their gender, their race, their years of service in the organization. We help them. And I think it's important just to get all us thinking about, what does it mean to be a good friend? And a good friend is somebody who has the moral courage to tell people what they need to hear, not what they want to hear. So it's just redefining some of these strands in a way that helps normalize these conversations.
It's like creating a buddy system.
Yeah,
honestly, I mean, that was huge and impactful. I don't know when that came about, but think about it growing up at camp. Think about, as we do it for children, but at the same time, why couldn't you do it in the workplace? Just keep it light. I mean, I know some people don't want that, or might not, or look at that condescending or however, but a simple buddy system is just a looking out for each other. You see something, you say something.
Yeah. If I'm not looking out for you, who's looking out for me? It's creating that mutual, backwards and forth as well. And it's such an easy thing when you talk about it. It's so easy, isn't it? It sounds so easy.
And I love that. I love that sort of whole thought process. I think that's really powerful, Graham, of friends look out for friends. And I mean, one of the biggest challenges that we still have in safety, even in 2025, is the fact that people can see something dangerous is about to happen, but because of that culture, they still don't stick their hand up, and they don't make that difficult decision, which is, I might get a bollock in here, but I'm going to say stop. Yeah, I've got to say stop just in case. And actually, it's better to say stop just in case rather than cross your fingers, grit your teeth, and hope that actually nothing bad is going to happen.
Yeah, I think it's important as well. It's important to give people the tools to be able to have these conversations, but there's some stages before that is often missing in these types of trainings or these types of conversations. And one is what is called the psychology of inaction. Why do people not have these conversations? We need to get it out in the open. Why is it that maybe in groups? Today, the 13th of March is the 61st anniversary of the murder of Kitty Genovese in New York. And at the time of her death, the big story wasn't so much about the murder, it was about why did no one help her? They identified loads of people who were apparently there who didn't render assistance. Some people did, but not everybody did. So in groups, so when you start to bring in some of the science on this in groups, and you help people see that sometimes in groups we sort of lose sense of self, we follow the group. Following the crowd is primal. So we need to help people see that. We need to explore the fear. The fear in organizations like policing and fire and other big organizations is you're going against the team, you're going against the family, you're going against that loyalty we just talked about. So that's why we need to redefine loyalty. Acting and doing something is often a transgression against the norm. And we need to make it normal. And there, other inhibitors are hierarchies. Hierarchies, not just formal ones, not just rank or whatever. These could be informal hierarchies, cliques, all these different things, like age, roles, service. So we need to look at the different hierarchies at play. And also we need to start to explore stress. Because when you witness something stressful around harmful behavior or around a mistake happening, your brain's running the show if you're not careful. And I was in a bar in France in Val d'Isère skiing with my daughter a few weeks ago, and I've got this habit now of eavesdropping other people's conversations. I don't know where I learned that from, but I've got this habit of just...
I do it all the time, Graham.
I
know my
my
wife is the worst.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Maybe I learned it from, I don't know, yeah. And these two men, they were pilots, they were fighter pilots. Fascinating conversation about AI and the impact on human behavior, human decision-making. And I said, can I join in? This is really interesting. So they introduced me, they were talking about some plane disasters in the world where nobody had challenged the captain and mistake and the fuel gauge went down and all that stuff. And they introduced me to this phrase, caging the gorilla. And caging the gorilla is just not reacting. Because if you react too quickly, your brain's emotional, it's shutting down the top part of the brain, the amygdala, the front part here, where your values, your belief systems, it's not there, it's gone. So you need to be selfish. I train people to not react, be selfish, take some deep breaths, get the brain working again, access your beliefs, your values. So again, it's simple. It's about bringing, even a basic knowledge of brain science can help you overcome that, the sort of inhibitor of stress. So helping people to, and another inhibitor is what's going on here. And that tool, the PACT model, is a great way to deal with ambiguity. You're not sure, you don't make it worse. So, give people the tools to do something. So exploring this psychology of inaction. And another thing that I do in my work is explore motivation. Help people see the benefits of intervening, because costs and benefits are often balanced. And if the costs outweigh the benefits, we don't intervene. So if I'm scared, if I don't think I'm going to be supported or ridiculed by friends, then I don't intervene. So we need to help people see the benefits. And the benefits are saving someone's life. The benefits are being loyal to your friend, loyal to yourself, loyal to your profession, your organization, your community. And when you start to put all these alongside tools, then we've got people who are equipped and motivated to do the right thing. And that just now, a lot of organizations just expect people to act. They use a code of ethics or a health and safety law. You need to do something. But we're dealing with human beings here, and human beings struggle to do things.
I'm just chuckling because again, we talk about it all the time, Graham, is this thing of again, I'm a cynical Yorkshire guy. I'm not going to do something because you tell me it's a business value. If I'm working on your shop floor, I'm not going to do it because you tell me it's a business value. I'll do it because if I understand why, and most importantly, what's in it for me.
Yeah, I think that's called reciprocity, isn't it? What's in it for me? And us human beings, we buy into things that we see benefits in. So we need to make this stuff look sexy, make it look attractive. What am I going to get out of this? And what you're going to get out of this is people looking out for you, and they can stop you making a career-ending mistake, or doing something that could lead down a path of, losing a career or worse.
And I think it's, and you were hitting on it earlier, and Jules, when we like to talk leadership, and I sometimes, Jules goes heavy, and I'm like, hey, let's take a step back, because so often I think we get hung up on expecting leadership to always be, and that's what I mean, not negative, but we expect leadership to make the right decision. We expect leadership to truly lead us. And you can look at the history of the world. Leadership screws up all the time. So how can we be leaders? How can we empower each other to be leaders? On the flip side to that, to sometimes, to your point, unleash the gorilla, or at least challenge, or be open to bringing up. And I think that's a challenge that's something I work on often, is, you might call it finding your champions or whatever. But how can we empower each other to be leaders, to be champions, so that we can, if we see something we said, or recognize things, so it can be fluid throughout. And I'd be curious to see your thoughts around that, because it's a challenge, I think, in workplaces, a big challenge.
I think, the simple thing we can start to do is to give permission. Just to make it okay. And it's, I've heard it being called like affirming trust in you. Like, I trust you, Langdon. If you see me making a mistake, just tell me. And here's how I want you to tell me. It's that, I do it a lot in my work, as part of my training, where I say to the group, okay, so let's say today you're about to make a mistake. You've upset somebody in your team, or maybe you're struggling with your well-being. How would you like a friend to come and speak to you? So let's talk about it. Let's talk about what is going to work on you. What is going to lead to you apologizing for your bad behavior? What's going to lead to you thanking the friend for saying to them? Because when we do that, what you'll find with most people is, just tell me, take me aside. Don't do it in public. Just take me aside. Don't judge me. Just get it out there and just tell me. And that is going to lead to, I think, people just reflecting on past behaviors and sorting the whole thing out. And I think that's the simple thing for me, is giving trust. I trust you. I was in India a couple of years ago doing some work with some American school kids at a school there, and we're talking about well-being and mental health. And at one point, I stopped the session, and I just said, I'm going to give you a minute to speak to your mates around you. Go and make it okay for them to come and speak to you if you're struggling with your exams or whatever. Just go and do it. And they just had a chat. And I think that's why, for example, in lots of organizations who seem to rely on like e-learning trainings for this type of stuff, science says it's not going to have much effect. You need to get folk in rooms. You need to get in the rooms talking about these, start to break down these inhibitors to action, the hierarchies, the informal hierarchies exist. Give people the permission. It's as basic as just chatting to your mates.
And one thing I can assure you, he's never apologised for his bad behaviour, Graham.
I mean, that's not true. No.
Yeah, the thing is, Jules, Langdon, as Guy, let's have something. Let's talk guys just now, right? If you look at big issues in the world, right, what's happening in the US just now, these are guys who are just playing the game with each other, and it makes it so much difficult for other guys to have the conversation, because we think that if we go against them, we're going to be called out. Our sexuality is going to be called out. We're going to be called anything other than manly. That's the fear we have. And Harvard did research years ago which talked about in male dominated cultures, teams, organizations, they called it a masculinity contest culture, where what we'll see poor behavior, we'll see lots of issues, but what we also see the silence of men. There's something in us men that stops us speaking up. It's that, I think it's from when we're in our teens, in our late teens, early 20s, that loyalty to our mates. It's hard. You'll see it in fraternities, Langdon, in the US. You'll see that's why bystander work is really effective in university settings in the US to deal with things like sexual violence or alcohol consumption, because these are predominantly, they're not just male issues. I'm not going to say that there's a big, but in my world of violence, most violence is committed by men against men. That's fact. It's fact. So we need to understand better why do us guys struggle to speak to our mates? And, a few baseball hats behind me, I work with the Chicago Cubs, the LA Dodgers, and some other teams at this time of the year in the spring training to tackle things like initiations or bullying or whatever, because these distractions off the field become distractions on the field. So it's getting them to think about that idea before that mate, being the good friend, taking friends away from difficult situations and giving people the permission to do it as well. So there's a specific issue in male groups as well, male teams.
Well, and I think also it's, first off, I did notice you didn't have a St. Louis Cardinals hat behind you, Graham.
Sorry.
So shame. Second, I think there's something to it. I saw a study, and I didn't look down into it, and I should have. I actually might pull it back, but it was talking about very close knit men friends when they ride each other, meaning they mess with each other. They really might call each other names. Science has shown, and I don't know statistics, I don't need to study, but science has shown how closer they are. So you can bring up a lot of things. I mean, Jules and I mess with each other all the time, but then sometimes there's a challenge on actually having some of the serious conversations. But then you think about that, Jules and I might call each other names that I wouldn't dare call somebody another person that you work with or whatever. So then there's that even additional differentiation that I think just goes exactly to what you're saying. It creates unknown, and trying to think about it from a workplace setting, it creates unknown. What can I say? What I can't say? What do I need to say? More importantly, and that's a challenge.
I think it's also that what shouldn't I say? Because actually we might think it's being done in banter and in jest and in fun, but actually what's it doing mentally in somebody's head? That's always the challenge, isn't it? And then what's the knock-on effect in terms of the way they behave as a result of that is the challenge.
But it's also, and that's okay. It's if you and me are best mates, Jules, and we're having that to and fro conversation, and then all of a sudden I cross the line. Human beings cross the line all the time. Yeah. But you tell me, Graham, enough. I'm going to say I didn't realize that. I'm sorry. Yeah. And that's what should happen. It does happen sometimes, but it doesn't always happen, because sometimes we get defensive. Come on, it's a bit fun. But again, that's why knowing what works in each other is really important. Knowing, if I make a mistake, just come and tell me. Don't be about the bush. Just tell me. Don't judge me. Don't shout at me. Just tell me. And if you do that with me, I'm going to say, mate, I didn't realize that. I'm sorry. I apologize. Let's move on.
And that's a culture thing, isn't it, Graham? Where and actually that's the culture we want, where you don't have people needing to run to an HR department. They can actually just have a frank conversation with one another to say, I wasn't comfortable with that. And somebody going, okay, I apologize. It's interesting that I was, again, thinking about what you were saying earlier, and I don't want to get too into politics because it's a dangerous area. But one of the things that's happened in politics over the last few years is this sort of thing of black and white, heroes and villains. And I read one of your blogs which talked about this, and I thought it was really interesting. And I was just going to get you to expand a bit on the dangers of heroes and villains.
Yeah, it's that good versus bad discussion, isn't it? You're a bad person, I'm a good person, I'm okay. And that's such a simple conversation to have in the world. The late Philip Zimbardo, the psychologist who did the prison experiment in Stanford University in the 70s, he highlighted that the power of the situation is so important. In any given situation, any one of us could do bad things. And it's so important that because if I simply say I'm good, you're bad, then I'm ignoring the potential for my silence, for my whatever, to be contributing to behaviors and whatnot as well. So I think it's, for me, as someone who's spent his last years in policing looking at violence prevention, it's too simplistic when people say, oh, they're bad, they need to go to jail. The questions we need to be asking, for example, is okay, who's responsible? That's important. People need to be held accountable. But why and what? Why is this happening? What's contributing? It's that idea of we need to walk and chew gum at the same time. We need to be holding people accountable, but we need to be understanding why. Why is this happening? Because if we don't, then we're just going to keep seeing the same thing happening again. And I think, when it comes to the work that I do a lot in organizations, silence is like an infection that just keeps things, silence tells people that's okay. Or silence tells a victim, we don't care about you. And nothing's going to change if we don't. And the world needs, not just the UK or the US, the world needs more moral rebels. We need active bystanders, people who've got the ability to meet people where they're at. Just now the world is so polarized and so divided. And if I go to a supporter of a certain president or a prime minister or whatever that's going to be and shout at them, they ain't going to work. But I think deep down, we probably want the best thing. We want the same. We want safety. We want connection, togetherness. So I need to try and find ways to meet people. The best advice I was given years ago from how do I engage men in violence prevention? Meet them where they're at. Don't impose your view. Don't say they're wrong, because it ain't going to work. And the social science backs all of that up. It's better to meet people, understand where they're coming from. That's the way forward, and try and start to drip things other ways or other lenses into their mindset.
And it doesn't just relate to criminality, does it? It relates absolutely to being a good manager, doesn't it? So if somebody's doing something bad, don't just react to it and sort of, I suppose, respond to what's happened. But it's that understanding of why, what's motivating and driving that behaviour in the first place. And actually, that's the thing. If you can start to get to it and start to tweak it, that where you can make big changes, particularly around safety.
Yeah, with Amy Edmondson, who talks a lot about mistakes and psychological safety, and she talks about the most successful teams are the ones that have the most mistakes. Why? Because they talk about them. They make it okay. And when she did the studies years ago, she made the mistake by assuming the most successful teams would be the ones with the fewer mistakes, and it's the exact opposite. When we create a culture where it's okay to talk about the mistakes, then we talk about it and we learn from them. Whereas if we're hiding our mistakes, we don't learn from them. And that's why aviation really leaned into these issues, because okay, we've had a few issues in the world in the last few weeks. That's another story. But in the past, they realized that pilot error and a lack of challenge was the big issue. Here in the UK, we've got NHS England, NHS in Scotland, where we're starting to learn about unnecessary dying, people dying needlessly. And a report a couple of years ago in England suggests that 11,000 people die in English hospitals down to toxic cultures and hierarchies. They were the factors. And it'll be the same in Scotland when they start to do a deep dive into these issues as well. So we need to create cultures where human beings make mistakes, and people who've experienced mistakes through policing or NHS, they need to understand that human beings make mistakes. And that's hard, isn't it? It's hard for you as a victim to realize that you need to accept that. But yeah, you still need some sort of support and validation, and that's important. But human beings from time to time will muck up. And a lot of that is down to their burnout, the workload, the fear of making mistakes. And we just need to get better at talking about these things.
I totally agree. And that's what we talk about often. How do you make that concept of failing safely, human organizational performance, everything? It's the safest companies in the world, not all, correct, but many of them, they learned how to fail. They learned from their failures, then they learned how to fail safely. And that's something we try to talk about often and work with for clients and on the podcast. It's because people are fallible. Mistakes are going to happen. But if we ensure that we've at least put the proper controls or mitigation processes in place, hopefully you can fail safely where nothing happens. And it's a challenge, but I think to me, it goes exactly to what you're saying in my EHS mind. It really ties perfectly to that.
Yeah. And it's about that, if we can get the culture where if I see you making a mistake, Jules, I can put my hand up. I feel safe. It's like, what was it? Toto Wolff, the Mercedes manager, see it, say it, fix it, or see it, say it, sort it. It's that mantra of, don't wait for it's on the track to tell us. Just tell us. If you see something, tell us about it, and we can fix it. And and that's it. It's that leadership we need that then just trickles its way down, but way back up again as well, so that we're all leaders. Leaders create leaders, and giving permission and making it okay. Sort of building curiosity, developing curiosity, creating learning environments. It's okay to ask questions. All these things start to create that culture. We can read lots of books on this, but for me, it's about helping people do it in the moment is important.
It's interesting. We talk about psychological safety a lot, Graham, and it's definitely a bit of a passion. I'd get rid of the term psychological safety because that in itself just scares people to death because they think it's going to be something really complex and confusing. It's about creating an environment. It's about creating that place where people feel able to talk. And again, something that was going through my head as you were talking there was a manager who uses retribution as a management style. It's disastrous. And you can take that up to the sort of the medical world, where it's been disastrous, where suing doctors, that's the form of retribution, then drives behaviors, doesn't it? So people, you were talking earlier about people making mistakes, they hide them. And every single one of us is fallible. There's none of us that haven't made mistakes in our lives. But actually, the best, like you say, and Amy Edmondson absolutely says it, the best teams are the ones who accept they'll make mistakes, but actually they create the culture where we say we've made a mistake and we learn from it. I reflect on this business, and I had to go to the CEO a few years ago and say, Matthew, we've just wasted £100,000 on a software system, and I'll never forget his reaction because he was just calm and he paused and he looked at me and he said, "Right, what we're going to do about it?" And we sat down and we thought about it and we came up with a plan. But that's what you've got to create. Whereas I've seen it in lots of other businesses where if I'd gone and said we've just wasted £100,000, there would have been China flying around the room. But that means I probably would have even maybe avoided going and having that conversation because I don't want the China hitting my head. Yeah.
I think it goes back to, we talked about a little, that good versus evil. In any situation, good people will do bad things. So we need to create the opposite, which is helping people do good things. How do we create the situation? And you're right, terms like psychological safety or other terms, they scare people. But this is the basis for our work. And I think we can bring it to life. We can try to demystify what psychological safety is. It's a journey. It's a journey of culture. It's a journey of questions, curiosity, learning, all these things. So we can have it up here, but we can, on the shop floor, we can talk about it in so many other ways. And it's like the work that I do. There's so much research out there that is sitting on shelves. That's doing nothing. It needs to be brought into these rooms, because another big influencer for human beings is evidence, social proof, authority. So when we bring the evidence into the room, then it's up to it's up to the audience to buy into it. They can still disbelieve the evidence, but it's not me. It's not Graham Goulden saying it. It's the evidence says. The evidence says. It's up to you if you want to buy into it. And I think Robert Cialdini talks about the words that you put in the end of sentences are really powerful influences. And he said that the three most powerful words at the end of a sentence, or three or four, is it's up to you if you choose. Give people choice, because if you say you need to follow me, then I'm taking your agency away. Whereas it's up to you, and then you spark curiosity. So for me, it's psychological safety is important, and then we need to acknowledge Amy's work. But as you say, we need to bring it to life. And I think that's what she would like us all to be doing, is the work that she's done to make it applicable and make it real and make it look good, so people buy into it.
Good. The other thing I was just thinking about, completely disconnected here, Graham, was when you were talking about creating that culture, I was thinking about I watched or listened to a podcast recently about Nick Leeson, the guy who brought Barings Bank down.
All right, okay, yeah.
And again, it's a similar situation because he started doing what he was doing with the best of intentions, and it went wrong, and he started racking up these losses. But there wasn't that culture in the bank that he was able to go to somebody and just say, I've screwed up here. And he kept trying to recover. And every time he tried to recover, it got worse and worse and worse, to the point where actually he bankrupted the bank because he'd lost that much money. And again, it's exactly that same thing, that cultural thing. And again, was anybody actually looking at him and going, there's something wrong with this guy?
What's going on? Yeah,
because he must have been exhibiting all sorts of signs of stress, I would have thought. Yeah,
that's right. But it's also that side of things. But it's also, we've talked a lot today, making it okay for I've mucked up, Jules. Like you talked about with your organization, and rather than see the problem and a push and blame, because society, I think we've got this idea that we need a pull on the head. We need a head mistake. We need to blame somebody. Whereas sometimes mistakes happen, and that's I always used to say to my cops in my shift, in Scotland, if you make a mistake, tell me, and we'll deal with it. We'll sort it out. But if you try and hide it, that's different. If you try and hide it and suppress it, then there's a difference there.
And every organisation learns through mistakes, and every one of us learns through mistakes. Right, going back to childhood, don't we? So our parents say, "Don't touch it because it's hot." What we're going to do? We are going to touch it because we've been told not to. But actually, that's how we learn. We go, "Oh, that hurts. I'm not going to do it again."
And then the other end of that is, look at heart surgeons who are now doing transplants, keeping people alive, and that, how many people probably died on the journey to get to that as well. So it's interesting when you look at, mistakes will lead us to a better place.
Before we wrap up, Graham, where can people find you? Where can people go and have a look a bit more into the sort of this whole approach of active bystander?
I'm visible on LinkedIn. I'll use LinkedIn a lot just to talk about a lot of this stuff. I've got my website, grahamgoulden.com, and you'll be able to email me, contact me in other ways there. And as you said, I write some blogs on some of this topic from time to time, and I'll give you an idea of what we're trying to do. What I'm trying to do, and bring some colleagues in from time to time to do this work. Just feel free, folks, to get in touch with me. The world needs people to be more active just now. We need lots of it, lots more action from people.
Great, Graham. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on. It's been a great conversation. Langdon, you're far better at ending these things than me, so I'm going to let you close us out.
No, Graham, we definitely appreciate it. And everything you're talking about is perfect for this closure. So we do appreciate your time, everyone. We hope that as you think about the bystander effect, as you think about how we can look out for each other, remember, ultimately, stay healthy, stay safe, and let's watch each other's back out there, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Two Bald Guys Talking Safety. Don't forget to follow and subscribe wherever you stream your podcast, or you can visit us at evotix.com.
And if you've liked today's podcast or you found some value from it, we'd really appreciate it if you could head over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a review or a rating. It really means a lot to us. Thank you.